Time is the sign. My name is Daniel Vallis, and welcome to our channel. And we've also talked about the warnings several days ago with Mercury and Jupiter, and also the reading that we looked at in Isaiah 40 verse 3, alluding to the same thing at the same time, prepare ye the way of the Lord. The signs in the heavens are matching up exactly with what's going on right now. We know we are at the time. There are warnings going on right now. Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. We must always refresh our memory about what we are being shown right now. But then we also notice the connection with Isaiah the prophet and Hezekiah and the sundial, and the concept of time going backward, shortly preceding this other messaging too as well. A connection of these themes and ideas, and also connected to Babylonian Chaldean perspective of astronomy too as well. There's many reasons why we're looking at a variety of subjects that are coming together right now, because it is an incredible picture of what Scripture has told us about before, so we have a better understanding of what is going on now. But when we look at this story, and it's repeated in other places too as well, 2 Kings 28, and Hezekiah said unto Isaiah, What shall be the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up into the house of the Lord the third day? And Isaiah said, This sign shalt thou have of the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing that he hath spoken. Shall the shadow go forward 10 degrees, or go back 10 degrees? Now remember, in our discussion of time and how God knows all the alternate possibilities, it should always catch our attention when God gives two options. God knows the results of history from either one of those options. But notice he gives Hezekiah two choices, but they are also limited choices too. God set the number of degrees, 10 degrees in either situation. Verse 10, And Hezekiah answered, It is a light thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees. Nay, but let the shadow return backward 10 degrees. And Isaiah the prophet cried unto the Lord, and he brought the shadow 10 degrees backward, by which it had gone down in the dial of Ahaz. Okay, so notice that normally the shadow goes downward as a natural progression. And what is happening is the shadow is moving backward. It's moving back up. And it's doing so by 10 degrees. Now there's a wide variety of what the sundial was. We don't have any archaeological evidence of what it was exactly, but there's a lot of speculation. You also find the consensus is that it was probably Babylonian in style and origin, because they were the astronomical leaders and gold standard at that time, and also Hezekiah's connection with Babylon too. And a lot of researchers estimate that the sundial was probably a gift from Babylon and or helped set up by Babylon, by the astronomers there. And it most strongly appears as a type where the shadow falls on steps or levels, and those marked off the different degrees. So when the Bible talks about 10 degrees, it's not talking about 10 degrees of a 360 degree circle, like on a circle or like we associate today. It's 10 units of measure, and we do not know what those units of measure are. But it was according to that particular sundial, however it was constructed. So, but as the sun went forward throughout the day, the shadow would fall on different levels and markings of that sundial construction, telling what time it was. And as it went forward, the shadow would go down. This was more of a vertical, or what you might even call a horizontal sundial type. The shadow would go down. It wasn't a flat sundial. And so the shadow would continue to go downward as the day progressed. And God offered Hezekiah two choices. Do you want me to make the shadow go down 10 degrees? Do you want it to go forward 10 degrees? Or do you want it to go back 10 degrees? Do you want it to go up 10 degrees? And Hezekiah's response is, well, it's going to go forward 10 degrees naturally anyway. That's no big deal. Make it go backward. Make it go up. And so the sun would have moved backwards and the shadow would have gone up. The shadow would have gone backward, up. The measurement, which they equated as 10 degrees, but we know as 10 units. But take notice of what happened. The shadow went backward after it had already gone down, which means the sun went into retrograde motion. The sun backed up for a little bit, then went forward again. And God brought the shadow again. It would go back down again after it was brought back up. And while we don't know exactly what that 10 degrees would be equivalent to, just with trigonometry, we know it's a measure of degree. It's an angular measure. And it caught my attention that we've been studying and noticing from the Chaldean perspective how they also associated the retrograde motion of Jupiter with 10 degrees and how that marked 10 degrees in the ecliptic sky. And when we look at the ecliptic and the constellations that are along the ecliptic, we've been focusing on Virgo and Leo at the top there. And the sun and the moon and the planets generally move along the ecliptic line there. The moon moves around the whole loop about once a month, about 12 times a year, not exactly. So it's moving the fastest. It's doing the fastest RPM, moving around that circle several times. And the sun, though, will journey that whole circuit once a year. Only make that once. And so while it's traveling once a year, the moon is making the loop several times. And for a biblical calendar, combining these two, we have a lunisolar year. We can't go with solely a year because the months are marked by the moon. And if you went only by the sun's circuit, pretty soon that would be out of sync with the moon because the moon is not exactly in sync with the sun. But you can't go totally by the moon either, or you'll be offset from the sun, and the spring cycles go by the sun. So you have to combine and average the two. And several people have mentioned recently about Enoch's calendar and how it was based on a 360-day count. One thing we have to keep in mind is from the time of Enoch and from before the flood to where we are now, the Bible records two significant events that happened with the sun and the moon. Joshua's long day, and then also Hezekiah's event too. So we have to keep this in mind. If Enoch's calendar was correct, and there's plenty of good speculation that it was correct at that time, but the clock movements no longer follow that. So even though it may have been correct before, the clock has been changed since then. And so you have to keep that in mind when you read the book of Enoch. The motion of the sun and moon right now is not the same. And the Bible tells us the examples of when it was adjusted. So we see how the sun moves, we see how the moon moves, but then Jupiter is very interesting, and this is what the Babylonian astronomers remarked about, is Jupiter's movement. The moon's going to be making its loop about 12 times a year. The sun's going to be doing it once a year, but Jupiter has a 12-year orbit, which means it's moving at 1/12 of that entire ecliptic once a year. It's only moving a 12th of it. It's moving very slowly. And so the Chaldeans, because of time prior to the sun and moon changes, the days and years were 360 days, yes, until they were changed. And so prior to that, though, they were able to divide the ecliptics in the heavens and the months accordingly. They were able to divide it equally by 12 and 360 degrees in the ecliptic sky. And so Jupiter was perfect for dividing it into equal amounts of 30 degrees on a 360-day calendar. And so we talked about how they gave special interest to Jupiter at opposition and its retrograde motion, and that's what marked 10 degrees. And they divided up the constellations into 30 degrees. So once you knew Jupiter's retrograde 10 degrees, you automatically knew how to measure out 30 degrees. And so that's how they divvied up the sky. Now, of course, that would move and slowly shift over time because opposition's always going to be in a different spot, and Jupiter's always going to be doing its retrograde in a different spot. And so we know they divided the constellations that way. And we also know that later on, around 700 BC, middle of 700 BC, is when they switched to doing it on the vernal equinox, which also divides it into equal portions of 30 degrees too, and that slowly shifts because of precession. So this sounds complicated, but just keep in mind they used Jupiter to help divvy up the sky and the constellation groupings, and this is what they gave great importance to as the main divider of the borders. So let's go to where we are right now, and we've been looking at our calendar on a string of what has been happening over the past months and year, even to as well where we are right now. We're at the red pin, the 19th and the 20th. Jupiter recently went through superior conjunction, so it's coming back onto the scene. It's getting brighter and brighter. It's rising in the morning sky now with Leo. So the lion is rising up again. And we see in just a few days ahead of us, around October 26th, 27th, is the default border. And we say default border because we don't have anything 100% outlining it, but we know by then Jupiter would be in Virgo stars. So it's a default border just on our understanding. Now when we zoom in a little bit, let's just take a look at the Revelation 12 sign in context of how the Babylonians would have looked at the sky sectioned up accordingly along the ecliptic by Jupiter's path, which is how they divvied it up. And let's specifically look at the pregnancy cycle here, which we know from a biblical perspective, the pregnancy cycle is going to start at Hanukkah. So regardless of the pregnancy birth at September 23rd, 2017, we know the conception starts at the time of Hanukkah. And we mentioned how December 3rd would mark a 42-week pregnancy from that time to September 23rd. That would be 42 weeks. But if you back it up to 40 weeks to sometime in Hanukkah, you can make the entire pregnancy cycle fit within that 10-degree arc as circled and outlined by the retrograde motion, the loop there. And the Bible doesn't tell us exactly what day the conception happened, just strongly indicates that it happened during the time of Hanukkah. So you could even back the conception up to the beginning of Hanukkah. Technically, there's nothing that says otherwise. The point that I want to emphasize is that the looping portion is really the pregnancy cycle rehearsal. That is the pattern right there in the loop portion. And since we know when the start is, from a biblical perspective, we have to consider the entire retrograde loop sectioning of the ecliptic is the pregnancy cycle. And when you read Revelation 12, it's rehearsing the first time he came. It's not going to be having another birth, but it's rehearsing how the woman, Israel, already gave birth to the Messiah. He was already delivered, but the sign is going to go through the motions again to identify what the picture is and what the pattern is. But the baby, the man-child, her child, was already delivered. And after it was delivered, her child was caught up unto God into his throne. He was caught up. He was taken up. We've covered that before. And so the Revelation 12 sign, it's a rehearsal of the pregnancy that did happen. And so that's why the pregnancy picture is there. It can be seen there in the motion of Jupiter. And because the Revelation 12 sign has the qualifier and lets us know that, yes, he did come, and right now he is in heaven, the one who holds the scepter is in heaven, this is one of the main reasons why we're looking at Jupiter in the heavens right now. With the Shiloh prophecy, we know the scepter is in heaven. And just like the wise men saw the prophesied star, which also represented the scepter, they saw that the first time. And the Bible tells us that the scepter is now back in the heavens. That's why we're looking for the star and the scepter in the heavens again, in light of the Shiloh prophecy. So even the Revelation 12 sign says this pregnancy was already done. The baby was already delivered. He's gone back to heaven. He was caught up into heaven again. He was taken back up into heaven. But he will be coming again, prepared either way. And that's what the whole Revelation 12 sign is. And so when we look at the Revelation 12 sign, the pregnancy cycle happens entirely within 10 degrees, marked out and sectioned out from a Chaldean perspective. You could fit that neatly into the 10-degree box, so to speak. And then Revelation also plainly tells us that the baby was already born. The sign is going through the rehearsal of the pregnancy and delivery process. But we know there is a gap. The baby was born. And so keep that in mind when looking at the Revelation 12 picture. The baby is already born in that picture too. He's gone into heaven. He is going to be coming back one day in 3.5 years. But it should catch our attention that knowing the time and knowing the signs and the seasons, we know the season of Hanukkah. We know the time that Hanukkah falls right at that proper time. We know the sign of the Revelation 12 sign, what it represents. When all three of them match up, and we also consider the Chaldean perspective of what the sign is doing, we see it neatly falling very orderly in that pattern. So when we back out a bit to get a perspective of where we are now, we see the sky divvied up by 10 degrees equally. We see a way to slice it and dice it that from a historical Chaldean perspective is very strong. And it lines up with the pictures that are being rehearsed in the signs at this time. So just using Jupiter, stay with me here, just using Jupiter, we can divide the two main sections of leading up to the retrograde division point and then after. That would be a picture of the two rehearsals. But we also know the October 26th and 27th also is a delineation visually of where the scepter is still in Judah. Because after that point, from a visual perspective, regardless of how the Babylonians would slice it and dice it and section it off, Jupiter is going to start entering Virgo, especially the main body point, right after that point too. So we are still considering the Shiloh prophecy leading up to October 26th and 27th. But we also know that in a sense, Jupiter, the scepter, is also sectioning out and drawing attention to very specific delineated times too as well. The picture patterns that are rehearsed, those are being drawn attention to in very specific slices. So we are about right here on the 19th, just past the Noah's flood starting rehearsal, the date that the Bible gives for that. But then we also see on the 28th and 29th of October, the rehearsal of when Noah left the ark after the flood. So this is a very interesting picture because both of these events land in the same month, but there's an entire year in between those two events. So I just thought that was a very interesting picture of a gap of time, so to speak, between two related events that happen just days apart on the calendar. There's a gap of time, though, that's also represented. And I also found it interesting that it's separated by that October 26th, 27th border too as well. We have to be careful reading into it. We cannot set a day or hour, but it should catch our attention that there's multiple pictures now of time, gaps of time, in connection with the biblical shadow patterns that we've been looking at too as well. And remember, the timing of the Hezekiah story with the sundial, that was brought to our attention by the reading that happened just a few days ago. And so we have multiple things being brought to our attention right now. We know we're on a threshold. We are at the threshold of the gathering. The enemy knows that too as well. And so while there is a lot we don't know, we do know that time is running out and that there are some very important pictures happening when we consider the time, the seasons, and the sign. And by looking at all of them, we have an idea of the time. That time is very short. And the signs all relate to time. So you have to have a proper understanding of time from a biblical perspective to understand the signs. Time is the sign. And we talked about how the enemy knows exactly what time it is. The organization that's been putting up the arch in the different places from Palmyra, that's been having a lot of messaging, getting ready for the son of perdition about to make his triumphal entrance. The artwork that they have on their main page, the guy's name means the gathering. They know this is about to happen. And we also talked about how he's Theseus, which is a very close representation to Heracles, which is the one who slew the lion in Greek mythology, and that's where the constellation Leo is associated with. And they have this picture on their main page, referencing the gathering and the idea of slaying the lion, and in connection to Shiloh, Leo, the lion, constellation too as well. They know exactly what time it is, and they know the sign and the meaning and the prophecy behind that timely sign. The enemy knows what time it is, that the world is at the beginning of the end, at a threshold point, going from the omega to the alpha point too as well on the ecliptic cycle. And I've been doing some more reading about this organization and just when they set up in New York City. And I've been finding more articles from museum curators and archaeologists who, even from a secular perspective, they're raising some eyebrows about this organization and this arch that they're setting up. And they were bringing a lot of criticism that they set up this arch, but they're not doing anything to educate people about the context of it. And they were criticizing how they weren't even handing out pamphlets, so there's no sign, there's nothing to tell them about Palmyra. They're just setting up an arch. It's almost like they're doing it for a stunt. And that's what they are doing it for. It's a stunt. It's a signal. They're not really interested in educating the populace about the historic context of this piece. No, it's for a signal. And even the secular world is getting suspicious about their motives. And they were also criticizing how at the unveiling that they had a app for phones that people could get to see 3D versions of the arch there. But that's all the app showed. Even the app didn't give any education about Palmyra or anything about the arch. It just showed a 3D picture of the arch. And we drew attention to the organization that made the app for this arch. The name of the organization is ARC. There's a lot that's coming together right now that the enemy is using deliberately to send a message, to send their signs and signals. The enemy knows we are in the days of Noah and Lot, knows the prophecy going on right now. They know the time. They know time is very short, and they know we are literally on the threshold. And Shiloh is about to gather his people, and then the son of perdition will be unrestrained, and he will make his dramatic revealing and coming onto the stage. He will be making his triumphal entry. And they're using these markers in connection with the media and the movies and all that to remind their disciples to keep their disciples ready. And so just recently they set it up in New York City, and we talked a lot about that. But then on their website, they talked about how the next location is going to be in Dubai and how it's going to be there in late 2016. And again, they're very ambiguous about where, when. The only thing they do state, though, is it's going to be sited next to one of the most iconic buildings in the world, the Burj Khalifa. So we know where they're going to set it up, and they actually gave more details with this than they did with the New York City part, too. Very suspicious organization and placement of these events. You would think they'd be broadcasting it months and weeks in advance. No, it's a signal. That's all it is. It's a signal. It's a warning. But it's interesting that they're bringing it to Dubai and where they're placing it in connection with the Dubai Future Foundation. And also the logo of that organization is of a spiraling whirlwind too as well, you could say. A portal, an Ouroboros. And that's what Satan wants to do with the time. He wants to create his own artificial eternity. But if you scroll down, you'll see that that organization has a quote. There has been a great deal of conflict in our region, and many monuments and artifacts representing the achievements of golden eras in our past have been lost as a consequence. Many have been intentionally destroyed in an effort to erase the memory of a time when people of all faiths and origins worked together to create a golden age of scientific, cultural, and social achievements. This collaboration between the Dubai Future Foundation and the Institute for Digital Archaeology means that we can literally roll back the clock and restore what the nihilists have damaged. There's a lot of very interesting wording here from the Dubai Future Foundation, referencing the golden era, the golden age, the age of Atlantis, Plato's Atlantis. A lot of pictures here. But it should catch your attention that here on the Institute for Digital Archaeology's website, where they talk about setting up the arch at the Burj, they mention and talk about rolling back the clock. Literally, rolling back the clock. So they could go back to their golden era. So they can restore these golden eras. There's a lot of messaging in what is being done here. When we consider where they're going to be setting it up at, they're going to be setting it up right near the Burj. And take note of the skyscraper, Babylon, Tower of Babel, silhouette picture. And then also notice the circle of how they have the roads around that whole section. The Tower of Babel with two circles. The highway there has two lanes moving in opposite directions. And the Tower of Babel imagery. And when we consider the Alice Through the Looking Glass, this is the exact same imagery that they use in the film too as well. And the Tower of Babel referencing with in connection where the clock is and time and how that whole tower is situated right in a large circle time clock. It has caught my attention that this is the last place where they're going to be moving the arch and setting it up. And when we look at how the scepter, Jupiter, with its retrograde motions has measured out 10 degrees in equal sections on the ecliptic, it has caught my attention that the enemy also seems to recognize this 10-degree division, this 30-degree division. Because when they set up the arch the first time at Trafalgar Square with Nelson's column and the church there too as well, they set it up right at the edge of the retrograde motion of Jupiter, right at the beginning of the 10-degree mark, and they only set it up for 3 days, right there at the turn, right at the start of the 10 degrees. And that retrograde then would mark out 10 degrees, 10 degrees, 10 degrees, which would be the 30-degree division for this portion. And just caught my attention that they did that right at the beginning of the 10 degree and right at the beginning of the 30 degree, right at the edge of the retrograde. Seemed very deliberate, and especially since they only did it for 3 days. But then they set up the arch again in New York City, right at the fountain, right at the same style too, as well as where they set up in Trafalgar Square. But they set it up for about 6 days here. But they set it up right at the end of this recent 10-degree division. Right at the edge. It ended right at the edge. Just caught my attention of how seemingly deliberate it appeared. And going forward, we know they're going to be setting it up in late 2016. But there's not much time left in 2016, and 2016 is going to end right there. So there's really only November or December left. There's not that much time left. And with the amount of enemy activity that we've seen so far and appearing to line up with the different 10-degree marks and how they've also been landing at proper seasons on the proper time too as well, landing exactly on the Feast of Tabernacles, we could make a educated guess that they will probably be setting it up mid-November to late November, either to coincide with the start of the 10-degree retrograde, which would mark the beginning of the pregnancy cycle, or they may set it up timed with Hanukkah, the season, like they did with the Feast of Tabernacles. Either way would be very significant, but it does catch my attention how they've been doing it with the edge markers of the 10 degrees. The enemy knows what time it is. Don't ever let that escape your attention. They know we're in the days of Noah and Lot, and we are right at the beginning of the end. Right at the threshold of the Shiloh prophecy, which transitions from the Omega portion of the ecliptic to the Alpha portion. And we've talked a lot of the messaging of how it lined up exactly with the media messaging that were going on at the same time over the past year with the events as well. All of this closely related together. The connection with time, the placement in Trafalgar, the messaging in Trafalgar that the Ready Bride is about to escape to as well. The messaging of the Lions and Nelson's Column and the Timekeeper and Avengers too as well. The fountains, which represents a gateway in time to the underworld. There's so much symbolism just the very first time they put it up. But then when they set it up the second time, they duplicated almost in a sense what they set up the first time. And with such precision that you cannot chalk it up to coincidence. Setting it up right almost across the street from a church that was modeled after the exact same church in Trafalgar Square. And they set it up right in front of a fountain that's almost identical to the fountains at Trafalgar Square. They are repeating a message. So it should more so catch our attention the timing and placement of when they place this message, because the message is the same in both cases. They know Shiloh is about to gather his people. They know they are running out of time for these events to transpire, and they know we are approaching a threshold of events. And they know the Son of Perdition is about to make his triumphal entry as soon as the Son of Man, Jesus Christ, makes his revealing when he shows up on the scene, picks up what he's already purchased, and goes home. And then they're going to be setting it up a third time, and by looking at the messaging associated with the third time, just what we know it's strongly connected to the Tower of Babel messaging, and almost going back to a golden age, which is what they want to do, connected with time and the future. And by the way, the observation point at the top of the Burj is using a trefoil design very similar to the quatrefoil design that's at the fountains. All of this goes together. They know exactly what they're doing. They know what time it is. They know that this is the days of Noah and Lot. And so we must be ready. We must be vigilant. We must be sober. We must remember Lot's wife, not get attached to this world. We're getting ready to leave. This world is not our home. We're just strangers and pilgrims here. And everything in the world can appear to be going on in life as normal. But that is not what our faith and outlook goes by. We do not go by appearances. We do not judge by appearances. We judge righteous judgment. What does the Bible tell us to look for? What does it tell us to keep in mind, to heed and to warn, and how we should be watching? That's what we build our faith on. And so we must be making ourselves ready to go through a door, ready to leave this world, leave it all behind forever. We should be making ourselves ready so that as soon as the call comes, come into the ark, come up hither. There is no resistance in our heart to go forward. There is a lot we do not know, but there is a lot that we do know. And so we keep going forward in faith, knowing that we've been shown so much that our Redeemer has called our attention to. And he wants us to know that our redemption is drawing nigh. And so we will continue to look up. We will continue to go forward. We will continue to remind ourselves and refresh ourselves. What has the bridegroom shown us? He's showing us this so we know what time it is, so we can live wisely, so we can shine bright. And the more we remind ourselves of this, the more we can go forward in faith on what we have been shown. So definitely download these sheets, print them out, study them, leave them and share them with others too as well. Let them know the importance of the time and of the seasons and of the signs. We have heard the trumpet call at midnight, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. So now is the time when we have heard the call. We have heard him. We don't know where he's at. We have heard him though. Now is when we rise up, we trim our lamps, cut the apron strings, so to speak, of our heart to this world, and we make ourselves ready. We rise up and we go forward to meet him halfway. Even though it's dark, even though we don't know specifics that we'd like to know, we keep going forward. Every single day asking the Lord for wisdom of what we should be doing, asking him for strength to go forward, and looking up, expecting to see him, longing to see the one we love and the one we serve first and highest above all else. Maranatha.